morning, everyone, or good afternoon. My name is Prashant Kumar, and welcome to this the webinar 6 for the Reclaim Network. So this webinar is one of those, the 18 webinars we have put as part of this Reclaim Network Plus. So the Reclaim Network Plus is one of the 3 networks which was funded by the UKRI, which is the UK Research and Innovation Council, on looking into the green-blue infrastructure implementation for sustainability of cities. So we have got 5 partners in this project. So I come from the University of Surrey, and then we have colleagues coming from University of Warwick, of Bangor University, University of Bath, and the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. So this network, has been kind of growing, and we got over 355 members today. That represents over 40 countries. So it's a very multidisciplinary and diverse network. So, so this is, as I said, is one of the 6th webinars out of 18 we have planned until March 2024. So usually it's on first Wednesday between 12:30 to 13:30 at the UK time. And we have 2 speakers. And each speaker is speaking for about 20 minutes. So all these webinars have been kind of recorded. So the last one we had colleagues from Malaysia and the UK talking about the urban heating and the linking, the why the other expressions are important in terms of the climate change. So that the whole idea of these webinars is to share the best practices and to bring the key kind of the case studies or the implementation, the information you have around the green-blue infrastructure. So this is an open kind of a call. So if anybody is hearing and they wanted to do the make a presentation, so they can just write to us, and we can very happily facilitate in the forthcoming the webinar there. So just to say a few notes before I introduce. Before further ado, I'm just going to introduce to our first speaker, Dr. Priyanka Jamwal. So Priyanka Jamwal is a doctorate in environmental engineering and management. She works at the interface of science and policy with a focus on water quality issues, and her work focuses on the identification of contaminant sources in surface water bodies, modeling the fate and transport of contaminants in urban hydrological systems, and assessing the risk to human health due to exposure contaminants. So she's also interested in developing design principles for the deployment and scaling of nature-based solutions. So over to you, Priyanka. But just to say to our audience, Professor Laurence Jones is here. So Laurence, if you are happy to facilitate the question answer session, that'd be great.
Yes,
Okay. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. And how do I hide this? I'm sorry. So first of all, I would like to thank Prashant as well as the organizers for giving me this opportunity to present piece of my work to the audiences who have connected. A very good morning and good evening and good afternoon to people who have joined from different parts of the world. So today I will be talking about nature-based solutions and the approaches we have used to deploy nature-based solutions in rural and urban landscapes. So I will be presenting a case studies from these 2 landscapes. So before I move forward, I would just like to tell you that I am a faculty fellow at the Center for Environment and Development at H3. And at H3, we do actionable research with the objective that different landscapes have different natural resources. So how the quality and quantity of these natural resources can be sustained. So we do actionable research to make sure that the resources are used for right purpose and are sustained for the design time. So before moving to my with my presentation on demonstration of the case studies, I would like to first walk you through the understanding the nature of problem. Unless and until we understand the nature of problem, it is very difficult to design efficient and optimal nature-based solutions. So understanding nature of the problem is very critical to designing the solutions. So this map basically is a map of Bangalore, old map of Bangalore city, and you can see these blue dots, blue landscapes, basically showing you the lakes or the reservoirs which was historically used by the local inhabitants to meet their irrigation and fresh water demand. But over the period of time, as Bangalore city developed, so just giving you the scale, at present, we are 15 million people living in around 850 square kilometer of area. And in 2000, the population was around 4 million, and in 2010, it was 10 million, that is according to the census. So given that the population increase was so rapid that the water supply infrastructure and wastewater infrastructure didn't match. And as a result, most of these lakes were receiving untreated wastewater flows. And then we witnessed frequent fire and foaming events in few lakes across Bangalore city. And the fire event, which I've shown in my previous slide, is from one of the biggest lake in Bangalore city called as Bellandur Lake, which has witnessed frequent fire events in past 3 years. So it was a huge concern. And in addition to that, the wastewater which is discharged from the city is used downstream by the farmers for irrigation purposes. And we all are aware what kind of health impacts can be there when untreated wastewater, which is a mix of industrial and domestic wastewater, is used for irrigations. So this is basically the nature of problem or concerning water quality issues in urban landscapes, taking an example of Bangalore city. Now coming to rural landscapes, what we have observed is that after Clean India mission, there has been a rampant deployment of soak pits to dispose of black water, whereas grey water, which is coming from bathrooms and kitchen, is not being treated. It is just discharged in open stormwater drains. And you can see here, the pipelines coming from the households directly discharging grey water, which is coming from kitchens and bathrooms into the open stormwater drains, where you have the black water being disposed of into leach pits, and the leach pits finally contaminate both the surface and groundwater. And then we see, these news reports coming out showing that, stating that the groundwater in rural areas is poisoned with nitrate and with fecal coliforms and other issues. So these are some of the water quality issues which we are facing both in rural and urban landscapes. Then the idea was what kind of approach can we use to address some of the water quality challenges in urban landscapes. So I will start with urban landscape, and then I will draw down to rural landscape, showing the demonstration, what we did, and how we deployed these solutions to address water quality issues. So as I showed you, so first my case study is related to Bangalore city. And as you can see, I have also explained earlier that in Bangalore, we had series of lakes, more than 1,000 lakes. And you can see that Bangalore city lies on the ridge, and it has 3 valleys, and the lakes are cascading in nature. Overflow from one lake enters into other lakes, and lakes are connected through stormwater drains. Historically, these drains were carrying only rainwater, lies on the ridge, and the lakes are interconnected. Overflow from one lake entered into another lake. But right now, these lakes are receiving wastewater, and there are huge water quality issues in these lakes. And I previously mentioned that most of the lakes are experiencing foaming, and there are a few lakes which are also experiencing fire, which, like, is a huge issue. So the general response from the government is that, okay, let us build another centralized wastewater treatment plant. But the issue with the centralized wastewater treatment plant is that the construction is very slow. By the time we are completed with the construction, the population has increased by a few millions. And they are very site-specific, they are large-scale, and they are expensive. So the idea was that, can we have some bottom-up responses where those responses can supplement top-down responses and help in addressing water quality issues. So as I was mentioning, that there are these wastewater treatment plants, both centralized and decentralized wastewater treatment plants, and the effluent from these wastewater treatment plants again enters into open stormwater drains, which finally enters into the lakes. So the idea is that these stormwater drains, which are connecting the lakes, can we have some interventions? Can we deploy some interventions in these intersections, which can help in addressing some water quality issues in the lakes? So the tactic, what we used was that, can these simple in-stream interventions create measurable impacts on the level of contamination within the urban water systems? Now, they will give us immediate performance. They are flexible. They will be tactical and can be scaled up. And we want to use cheap materials, and they should be easy to maintain, and also with the help of community engagement. So the first thing we did was, how do we hide this? So first thing we did was, we tested, when we are saying that we want to build these nature-based solutions, these interventions, the first thing was that, can we test some filtration material which are cheap, readily available, and which can be used for treatment. So we tested these three materials, terracotta, gravel, and cinder, and we found that terracotta gave us the best efficiency, whereas gravel was kind of like, giving efficiency which was comparable to terracotta. So then, once we established our work with the lab setups, with the lab experiments, we collaborated. We collaborated with other institutions, with the government stakeholders, to demonstrate the impact, to have a demonstration site which works under the real conditions, because the lab experiments, or the experiments, the image which I showed you in the previous slide, was basically in the lab where the synthetic wastewater was prepared and the materials were tested. So now we wanted to test the materials under real conditions. So we collaborated with government stakeholders, because we had to seek the permission, and we collaborated with the implementers and landscape architects. And then we chose one of the lake series and one of the lakes at Salkere, and we did a demonstration. So this is the lake, and this lake was receiving grey water from the upstream area. So you can see this is the grey water. So what we did was, we diverted a part of grey water, and you can see these setups. One setup is with the gravel, and one is with the terracotta. And we tested this system for 2 years, and you can see, and the results are already published but this paper is already published, and we looked at, and we found that there was significant reduction in the organic matter content, but the fecal coliform levels, because the retention times were too low, so that we did not see very high reduction in fecal coliform levels. Can we go next, Robin? So, and then next. So the results from this particular study was used to develop a scenario, to test various scenarios at the catchment scale in one of the catchments in peri-urban catchment, where we said that, okay, we use the swim model to find out where are the optimal locations, so that we have these multiple systems deployed at the catchment scale, which can give significant improvement and improve the water quality of the receiving lake. Can we go next? So this was the example from the urban landscapes. Now coming to the rural landscape. Now now, as you know, that groundwater, 80% of the rural landscapes depend upon groundwater for meeting their freshwater demands. And I have shown previously, groundwater quality and quantity is a major challenge in these landscapes. And for demonstration, what we have done, and this project was in collaboration with the James Hutton Institute, and it was funded by a hydronation project through Scottish government. And so the deployment was done at the school, where the idea was that the grey water flows and black water flows, which are discharged from the school, are creating issues with the surface water and groundwater quality. Can you move next? And so we deployed these solutions in one of the school, which is located near Mysore, which is again one of the towns in India. So the school has a population, number of students were around 206, and the staff were around 10. And the school had issues related to quantity and quality of the fresh water which they were receiving. Can we go next? So what we did was we deployed integrated water management approach, where the idea was that how we can reduce dependence on freshwater sources, reduce pollution of surface water, and also engage community, because community, unless and until we engage community, sustaining these interventions, sustaining of these intervention and efficiency of these interventions is really difficult. So community engagement was key to deployment of this particular project. So the approach we used was that for intervention, the design of the intervention was guided by the baseline assessment, which had both total and technical component. There was community and stakeholder engagement, and the design was co-developed with children, because children were the main stakeholders to the intervention. And in addition to that, long-term monitoring of these interventions was done, and youths were engaged, so that the knowledge of this intervention is embedded within the community. So can we go next? So for the baseline, we started with doing the baseline, where we looked at the catchment scale. We assessed the groundwater quality, the surface water water quality at the catchment and at the school level. Next. And in addition to that, as I mentioned, we also understood the barriers to the sanitations through the children. What are the barriers? What are the needs of the staff and the student, which helped us in co-developing the design of these systems. Then we also did a social, because if we want to assess the impact of intervention, it was very important for us to understand what was the usage of toilets, frequency of urinating, and other key aspects which were very important for designing these interventions. So once we understood the baseline, So once we understood the baseline, so again, the baseline data is already published. If somebody wants to get a deeper understanding of what we did, you can definitely take a look at this particular paper. So we found that the COD, so you can see this red bottle, basically it is showing the effluent which is coming out from the kitchen. Like the COD and DOD values were very, very, very high. So then definitely the design of the intervention was guided by what the baseline assessment showed us. Now, next. And in addition to that, the community engagement was the key. We wanted to design, we wanted to select appropriate technologies that suited the environmental and social condition of that particular area. So, for this particular project, what we did was, once we understood the baseline, we deployed. Gautam, can you next? Just give me the. So we deployed grey water treatment system. Then there was rainwater harvesting, because the school was facing frequent groundwater quantity issues. Then for black water, his earlier school was having soak pits, but then this was replaced with the black water treatment system. And in addition to that, constructed wetland was deployed. So for water treatment system, we just use the filtration media, which was a different grade of filtration media. And what we found was that the quality of the grey water, even after filtration media, was meeting the discharge standards, urban reuse standards. And when I say grey water, it was the water which was coming from the hand wash and the kitchen wash. And you can see these yellow tanks. Basically, they are the overhead tanks where the grey water was pumped and was used for flushing in the toilets. So the connection is to the grey water was used for reuse for toilets. For septic tanks, the septic tanks, as we all know, that they can only remove 60 to 70% of the BOD. So then the septic tank was supplemented with constructed wetlands. And again, so this particular project had two components, the research component as well as the deployment component. The research component was that we wanted to test the efficiency of system with plants and without plants. And for septic tank also, we had two septic tanks representing stirred tank reactor, continuous stirred tank reactor, and the plug flow tank reactor reactor system to see which systems give us the best efficiency. And we found that the grey water treatment system, as I already mentioned, were meeting the discharge standards for urban reuse, and the BOD levels were low as 10 milligrams per liter. And in case of black water, as you can see, the results are already published. The constructed wetland efficiency results are already published. And what we found was that the effluent was meeting the discharge standards set by Central Pollution Control Board. Again, there were a lot of questions that why not the effluent was reused for gardening or for growing vegetables. We deliberately chose not to do that because in schools, when there is risk of children getting in direct contact with treated effluent, and treated effluent has fecal coliform. So we just wanted to avoid the risk through the reuse. So in terms of the reduction in the freshwater use, we found that there was 54% reduction in water consumption after deploying this technology, and also the quality of runoff in the stormwater drain, which was earlier carrying grey water, was significantly improved. In addition to that, as I mentioned to you, that embedding knowledge within the community was very important, because after we leave the project, how do we make sure that the system is still up and running? So for that, we conducted a youth training program, and it was basically a part of social science work where the social scientists formulated and came up with this youth training program where the youngsters were made aware of the technologies. They were given these skills of how to do troubleshooting, and if technology doesn't function, how to make sure that the system is working, and if some problems happen, they can do little bit tweaking, and the problem can be resolved then and there itself. So this was the case from the rural landscape. And as I mentioned to you, that it should also do a lot of outreach, where whatever work we do, we make sure that it is reached, or it is being conveyed to policymakers and to stakeholders through popular magazines, through writing through journals, because writing in journal papers, we are targeting one kind of audiences, and when we write popular articles through blogs and through social media and through popular science, through popular magazines, we are targeting a different kind of audiences, which are policymakers and common people. So you can see that this particular work was also featured in popular magazines, and with that, we also do a lot of engagement with citizens in and around nature-based solutions, and also water quality, water quality monitoring and other aspects. And living labs is also one of the things which we are now coming up with, because Italy has received some grant for restoration of lake, and where we are deploying nature-based solutions, and also coming up with the concept of living lab, engaging school children in gaining experience and learning through these living labs. So finally, I would like to acknowledge all my collaborators, and again, thank you, Prashant, for this opportunity. And I'm extremely sorry for the technical glitch that happens. Extremely sorry. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Priyanka. No, that's fine. I think we know the technology sometimes do not work the way we want them to work. So without further ado, I would like to introduce to our next speaker, Dr. Tse-Hui Teh. She's a lecturer of urban design and planning in the Barrett School of Planning at the University College London. So she uses a collective co-evaluation of act and trajectories framework to understand how water and sanitation infrastructures can become sustainable. She also uses these techniques to create co-design games that can enable public participation to change urban infrastructure. And her current projects looks at urban rice and grass farming in Antananarivo, sorry for my pronunciation, water reuse in Sydney and London, water quality in the UK and Wales, and vacuum plus toilets in London. So over to you, Dr. Teh.
Okay, can you hear me? And can you see my?
Yes, we can hear you, but yours somehow the screen size is coming small. I don't know whether it's me or only see like that.
Okay, hang on a second. I will. Is that bigger now?
Yes, that's
Perfect.
better.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. So thank you also for this opportunity to present my research. This is quite of a different scale from what Priyanka just presented. This is really tiny, and it's about co-designing a community garden as blue-green infrastructure in London. So it is work done by myself and my co-investigators, Professor Sarah Bell, who was at UCL but is now at the University of Melbourne, Dr. Charlotte Johnson, who was at UCL but now is at the Centre for Sustainable Energy, and Dr. Gemma Moore, who is still at UCL, so is still a colleague. So here we are. Slide is not progressing. So what I want to talk about today, why a community garden? What is the Kipling estate? What is co-design? What was the process of co-designing? What were the outcomes? And where can I find out more? Well, mostly you. So why a community garden? So all gardens can be considered part of a blue-green infrastructure network because they are spaces which alleviate surface water runoff and are opportunities for biodiversity. In this case, the community garden was an opportunity that arose because UCL was working on a different part of the leather market, managed housing estate, about water sustainability. The residents of the Kipling estate had long wanted a community garden on the roof of their car park. And as researchers, we were thinking that the blue aspect of this garden could be used as a local flood attenuation area, holding rainwater back from immediately entering sewer network, and as a place for evapotranspiration so that some of the rainwater never enters the sewer network at all. The green part would be that it's infrastructure for social sustainability by facilitating interactions between residents of the Kipling estate, building community cohesion and social learning. And it was also good for diversifying access to fresh fruit and vegetables and to increase biodiversity from a monoculture of grass. So some of this for international audiences might feel, why on earth is London thinking about these things? But this area of London is very prone to flooding. It's only mostly held back. So there's a lot of localized flooding, basically. And it's also not a very wealthy area of London. So access to fresh fruit and vegetables is important to these residents. But the question is, how could this be co-designed with residents so that the blue sustainability aspect, which is about the water, would be supported? Because the danger of establishing a new community garden is it actually adds to potable water use because plants need to be watered to stay alive. So this is the Kipling car park roof. The Kipling estate is in South London. It's actually not far from the Shard, the London Bridge Station, and the tourist destinations of Borough Market and the Southwark Cathedral. It's in Zone 1 on the Tube, and it's physically central London, but it doesn't have the built character that people associate with central London, as you can see on the slide. It was built in the 1960s and comprises of 2 tower blocks containing 156 flats and 10 low-rise buildings with 112 flats. It also has this 60 car space garage that was designed to have a playground on the roof, accessed through 2 communal homework rooms in each tower block. This was never built. As you can imagine, the pressures of this estate to regenerate, densify, and gentrify is immense. So it is currently a mix of a third social housing, a third owner-occupier, and a third private renters. This car park has a surface area of 1,400 square metres. It has been closed to residents since the 1980s because of safety concerns about rubbish being thrown from flats, including the myth that a fridge was once thrown out from one of the top stories. The residents in the towers overlooking the car park roof have dreamt of creating a garden on this roof for many years. This was supported in principle by the management body, but they did not have the funds to meet the costs. So when the opportunity came up for a NERC, Natural Environment Research Council, RISE, Regional Impact from Science and the Environment funding, the idea of working with the residents of the Kipling estate was floated with the management board, who then talked to the residents, who then agreed to support the funding bid. Happily, we were awarded the grant for Camellia, which is Community Water Management for a Livable London. And now here we are. And I'm here to tell you that this is still how the Kipling car park roof looks today. So don't worry, there is still a garden, there is blue-green infrastructure, and there is co-design, but not on the roof of this car park. So what is co-design? Design is about proposing new models of how the world could be. And co-design is before a designer proposes anything at all, they bring together people and things who are likely to have to change to discuss and eventually decide on what changes or not to consider, and maybe decide on how they will change. So we think of co-design as having 3 main modes. There's the client mode, contributor mode, and collaborator mode. So the client is when the community commissions work from researchers. A contributor is when the community participates in research organized by researchers, and a collaborator is when the community and the researchers try to align their aims for a mutual project with different beneficial outcomes for both parties. Which mode is most appropriate just depends on the needs and capacities of the community and the researchers. The client mode needs a very organized community group, whereas the contributor mode does not. The collaborator mode needs some organization, but also helps build a new type of community around the project. No mode is better than another. In this case, we worked with the residents of the Kipling estate in a collaborative mode. So here it is as a diagram. So we have the unused communal space, which was that car park roof. We have the Leather Market Kipling estate and this community garden for residents that they want. So that was their project that they wanted there. We were interested in water management as the Camellia project, and we wanted to look at this co-design process for blue-green infrastructure. So we have these 2 sort of aligning, sort of not aligning projects. So there's a little bit outside of the scope, and there's most of it is aligned. So I'll go through a co-design overview now, which is within the years of working with people on various types of co-design to improve their living conditions. We've developed a streamlined methodology described in this diagram here, which we think it takes a minimum of 3 workshops, and though you can extend each stage with more workshops depending on the resources you have. So all the things on the outside are things that the researchers need to do. And the things on the inside here, the workshop, is where the co-design really occurs. But without the things on either side. To support these workshops, you won't get co-design. So the first thing is to set aims, to characterize your communities by using conventional social science research. And that then goes into this development of this co-design workshop. On the outside, you bring in different tools that you use within or without the workshop. And then all the way through, you have this sort of evaluation of the ways the participation is going, the procedures, the satisfaction, are the values staying on track. So we have these 3 workshops: capturing requirements, analysing options, and crafting solutions. So now I'll go through it for the Kipling Garden itself. So first of all, we worked with the Tenant and Resident Association, the TRA, interviewing 2 members who had participated in the Camellia funding interview. We discussed how the space was currently used, as well as ideas and concerns about changing it into a green space. We spoke to relevant teams at the Joint Management Board, including a gardening team, to get their perspective on how this might impact existing maintenance and gardening responsibilities. In parallel, we asked for relevant local contacts and identified stakeholders who had some power to influence the space. So this included local councillors, staff from the flood risk and urban regeneration teams, the wastewater strategy team, and the utility company, Thames Water. Our assumption was that each of these groups had valuable and complementary knowledge about parts of the infrastructure that we could bring together in order to co-create capacity. For example, the stakeholders brought with them their knowledge on institutional priorities and programs. Residents understood the reality of how water infrastructure worked, which drains blocked, and where the impact of heavy rain was felt, who could fix water issues in the estate or in their flat. And researchers could bring in academic expertise on water impacts in a form that was usable by participants and deploy processes which could elicit different perspectives and bring participants together to design the space. We encourage residents to participate in our co-design process through a number of channels, including posting invitations and going to TRA meetings. That's the Tenant Residents Association meetings. So then we ran these workshops, bringing together all these different groups. We wanted to make this as easy as possible for residents to attend. So we ran the workshops in the Tenants and Residents Association hall on a weekday evening and limited them to 2.5 hours each. Tea, coffee, and snacks were provided by the Tenants and Residents Association. Really nice, because that really facilitates a lot of the chat that happens where you want people to collaborate and co-design. So in workshop 1, we focused on understanding these divergent values and opportunities connected to the space and finding ways for these to converge into plans that could be developed. We did this thing that we called an infrastructure safari. So this is what this infrastructure literacy tool is, to develop a shared understanding of how the water infrastructure in the estate currently works. After workshop 1, interested residents went on a garden trip to community gardens in the area. So that's also the social learning. Meanwhile, we were preparing for workshop 2 by this evaluation section, and then developing more tools that we could use in workshop 2. So in workshop 2, we explored enabling and constraining factors that then formed 2 groups to create models of the gardens accompanied by narratives of how this imagined design had come to be. So it's really important in terms of contextualizing what was possible and not possible. So this model was made of cardboard, used Lego figurines as people, cutouts of plants and other garden fixtures, colored paper, pens, sticky tape, and blue tack. The outcomes were recorded by video. So this was quite an interactive workshop. And then we went into crafting solutions, which is the much more, I guess, practical bit of this co-design process. Because at this stage, we talked through the financing options and the different implications this had for the realization of the garden. Because different types of funding also come with different expected outcomes. We measured up the roof of the car park and created an outline designs of garden with their water implications. And this was developed with the help of the Imperial College, who lead on the Camellia research program. And they did a simple sort of modeling exercise with tiles, which people could then put onto the roof and see, okay, if I have like a medium type of water use plant, I will need to have a rainwater butt of this size in order to keep that area watered for 20 days, etc. So then we had these different runoff coefficients as well. So they realized, okay, by putting in these different tiles that show, okay, these are soft surfaces now, actually that then absorbs a certain amount of water and we have flood attenuation. So this model was then also used for a funding bid to the GLA, which was successful because they could see the blue implications as well as the green implications of funding this type of infrastructure. We also at that stage, so that's this rainwater harvesting and attenuation calculator, we also had money to install a prototype, which was really fantastic for them because they could see something happening from their actions. And that was a pilot rainwater harvesting tank, an irrigation system, and 3 trial planters. This was done at different stages. The rainwater tank was installed by a participating resident who was also a qualified plumber. The pump system was installed by a third party, and the planters and plants were chosen and installed by the participating residents. So this was the vision for the Kipling roof. This was generated by the residents. Overall, 16 residents and 6 stakeholders participated in at least one of the co-design workshops, together with 8 researchers and 3 MSc students. The group produced this outline design for the space and raised £20,000 in local authority funding towards its implementation. But this was never to be because they commissioned a structural study and decided that the car park roof needed too much reinforcement to have this particular design. And then there's just the pressures of redevelopment on this area. Like this car park can be demolished and we don't know, another 20 houses put in. So what they did find was a new area for a community garden. So this was because they had won the funding, this put the pressure to actually spend the funding and get the community garden going. So what happened was that they took over this bit of the garden, which had been dug up to improve the heating system on the estate, and used this as an opportunity to establish their Kipling community garden and orchard. So that's the beginning of a garden as well. And here it is. So you can see the shard there in the background, the orchard that has started to be established, and all the raised planter beds, as well as some of their produce, which looks particularly tasty in this photograph. So if I have time, I don't have time. I would have liked to read to you the words of one of the participants about the social effects of the community garden, because it's not all about just the growing. So what it is about this, it's about the connections people make because they now have this shared project, as well as the water, as well as everything else. So they do say, in particular, that our Kipling roof garden calculator ably schooled them to understand that there are 24 raised beds, 17 green spaces, sheds, 12 water collectors, and they had a 37% peak attenuation on their leaky garage roof. So that was like fantastic that they got educated enough to understand all of that. So to find out more, we do have a book coming out, which is Co-Designing Infrastructures, Community Collaboration for Livable Cities. So there's more examples of co-design there. And then you can go to camelliawater.org, which is this website here, to learn much more about, there's a lot of different projects that are going on. The Water Info Hub will be launched soon. So if you actually have a specific interest in water itself, that will be a hub that brings together a lot of resources. And then the garden water calculator itself will be launched, we're hoping before the end of this year, probably late November. with which you could then use to figure out your own garden needs. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Teh. This was very interesting presentation and very practical. So I'm going to pass the turn to my colleague, Professor Laurence Jones, to take over the Q&A session.
Okay, yeah, thank you both for those very interesting talks. And just an encouragement to all participants that if you've got any questions, put them in the Q&A channel below. So the first question is, it's a bit of an open question. It's from Tung Maina, but I'll ask this to Priyanka. So the question asks, basically, there's a lot of research that shows these sort of small scale NBS solutions deal very well with solids and particulates, but they don't seem to deal very well with, with contaminants like E. coli. So are you aware of these kind of small scale solutions that can help with reducing contaminant load?
So when we talk about pathogens, chlorination is one of the solutions which have been adopted, especially in tropical, in developing countries. So initially we thought of for a particular case study which I presented from the school, there was an inclination towards deploying chlorination after we have constructed wetland effluent coming out from the constructed wetland. But then the chlorination is essential only when the water is, or the treated effluent is reused for landscaping, or there is a chance of people getting in direct contact with the water. But given that we were not intended to reuse this treated effluent from constructed wetland for landscaping or for gardening, then the chlorination, we did not go ahead with the chlorination. But yes, you are right that these small scale systems are not, and even the large scale systems, if you look at activated sludge treatment processes or extended aeration or USBR, none of these systems are very effective in removing fecal coliforms or pathogens. So ultimately, either it's disinfection through chlorination or through UV, which is deployed to remove these fecal coliforms. So there is an example of oxidation ponds where, when the water is exposed for longer time to sun rays, to UV rays, there is natural degradation in the concentration of fecal coliforms. So that could be one of the interventions which can be done, but then those interventions are only deployable at the places where the land is available, right? So in urban landscapes, it's not possible, but yes, in rural landscapes, it is possible to have these solutions like oxidation ponds where water is allowed to stay in the shallow ponds for longer durations for fecal coliforms to die.
Thank you very much for that clear answer. So I have a question for Tse-Hui. So the question is from Joe Hershan, and Joe would like to know a little bit more about the water use in community gardens. And this is in the context of, perhaps drought conditions where water use might be restricted. So did you include other strategies such as rainwater harvesting to essentially to kind of use other water sources like grey water?
Yeah, that was the whole idea, is that we could let them know that the type of planting that they use might use more or less water. So, for example, all those vegetables you saw are high water use, which does then mean that you need to have a larger water tank in order to be able to water your plants over those drought periods. So, yes, that is exactly it. But it was also to tell them that you kind of need to use the water, because when you want the water tank to be empty is just before it rains, right? So then you have the maximum amount of flood attenuation. So there's actually, because we don't quite have smart water butts yet, you kind of actually need to educate yourself about that, so that then you're going to be able to release your water at the right time, as well as save your water for those drought periods, and also tailor your planting towards the types of water I guess, environment that you're in, because some places have more rain than others, and London doesn't actually have that much rain.
I'll just ask a technical follow-on question to that. So the overflow from the water butts, where did that go? Did that just go into
That just
sort of soak away, or did it go directly into drains?
I think that the one that we've got just goes directly into the drain. I don't think it goes into a soak away. Yeah, it would be better if it could go into a soak away.
Yeah. And then there's a follow-up question from Joe, asking about the long-term financial viability of community gardens. So what are the maintenance costs in the longer term?
I think we didn't look at the maintenance cost over the longer term because it's understood from the community itself that this is volunteer work. So there's nobody gets paid to do their to maintain their allotment. I mean, there is like general maintenance that would have happened on the estate anyway in terms of garden maintenance. So the trimming of sort of grass around it, but each of the pots are actually maintained by the community itself. So it's not expensive from that point of view because it's volunteer labor.
Okay, and have we got time for one quick question? So I'd like to ask Priyanka one more quick question. Did these small scale approaches, are they sort of relevant to the major pollutant sources for these lakes? So I'm wondering if, things like the foaming issue and the lake catching fire issue, are they driven more by illegal dumping from industrial processes, for example? And do your processes help tackle that side of the pollution load as well?
Yeah, so Laurence, this is a very interesting question, and this was the common consensus which was building among the stakeholders, that it's industries which are responsible for firing and foaming events in Bellandur Lake. But then, because we really wanted to understand what are the reasons for fire in Bellandur Lake, so we took up this work as a part of a Sunrise project, which again was in collaboration with CEH, and I worked with Laurence Carvalho. So we picked up dissolved gases and ambient gas samples from Bellandur Lake and one of the restored lake in Bangalore. And what we found was that the methane gas concentration, dissolved methane gas concentration in Bellandur Lake was 1,000 times higher than what we got in Jakkur Lake, which clearly showed that the methane gas was coming out because of the anaerobic degradation of the sediments which had deposited from past 20 years. And those were basically coming from wastewater, domestic wastewater, and industries had to do nothing with that. And coming to the foaming issue, again, there was this consensus building that it's the industries which are discharging. Then there was another hypothesis which was building that it's detergents which we use. But then the question was that if it is detergent, then why don't we see foaming at the inlet of the lake? And why do we see foaming at the outlet of the lake? Because we see mountains of foaming at the outlet, but nothing at the inlet. So then the question was that there are some in-lake processes, biological processes which are taking place. There are filamentous bacteria which are producing certain kind of enzymes, which in addition to presence of phosphates and detergents are producing this very, very stable foams in the lake. So that was the kind of investigative and actionable research which AFRI did. And we clearly showed that it was not industries, but it was coming from the domestic sources. So we need both the large-scale interventions as well as the bottom-up, small-scale interventions, supplementary nature-based solutions to tackle the water quality issues.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we've probably had enough time, and we've reached the end of our hour for the seminar. So I will hand back to Prashant to close the webinar.
So thank you very much to both our speakers for very interesting talks. And we can see, there's quite a lot going on in the domain of green, blue, grey infrastructure. We always have something to learn from each other and implement as needed. So also to thank our Q&A session chair, Professor Laurence Jones, and a number of colleagues in the background who have been really working hard to get these webinars happen, especially Mark Simmons, who is on the call, and Cisse and others. So we got a very interesting and a quite high-profile webinar coming up next. So you can see the Professor Paul Monk. So he's a Chief Scientific Advisor at the Department for Business, Energy, Industrial Strategy, and he will be talking about the role of blue-green infrastructure in net zero. And another fascinating talk by Professor Christopher Rogers, who is the Director for the Center for Infrastructure and Urban Systems at the University of Birmingham. So, and he will be talking about the pervasive green infrastructure corridors, routes to more sustainable, resilient, and livable cities. So I invite you all to join this next webinar. Just to say very quickly before I close this session is that if you are new to this webinar series, you can visit our webpage called reclaim-network.org. You can find a number of opportunities for a secondment, for the large grant call we have just issued. There are workshop opportunities, and you can find actually the recordings on the previous webinars as well. And if you are on social media, you can follow us on Twitter, which is reclaim_network, and on the LinkedIn, where the link is given. But if it's put in search, I'm sure that you will be able to find it. And if you have any questions or any related to any of these areas, just send an email to us on info@reclaim-network.org. So thank you very much, everyone, for participating and for joining and listening to this very interesting talk. We will be back next month with another webinar. Thank you.